Who is the other person with a disability in the Eternals?
Before I go there, I wanted to add a couple things from the last video that people contributed in the comments.
The suspense is killing me.
So many people thought Makkari was mute, not deaf.
Oh, because they never said that she was deaf.
And did you realize that no one else ever signed to Makkari?
They were together for thousands of years and none of the other Eternals learned sign language? They made her read lips the whole time?
See, I think it's further evidence that Makkari is able to hear what people are saying, similar to how Daredevil sees.
It's 2023. Daredevil was groundbreaking disability representation in 1964. Why can't we have a deaf character who is deaf? And dang, was the writing confusing.
This is why we have to canonize disabilities in the story. Makkari is played by a deaf actor and is canonized in interviews as the first deaf superhero in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But then they make her able to understand people talking, even with her back turned, and hear sounds through vibrations. It's
so frustrating. Okay, stop making me wait any longer. Who is the other disabled character?
Thena.
Mad Weary.
Which is a metaphor for
mental health issues that make you violent.
PTSD.
Oh, so not far off.
This is why I hate most depictions of PTSD.
Why?
I have PTSD, technically complex PTSD or CPTSD, the same as Thena.
What's complex PTSD?
Multiple traumas or trauma over an extended period of time. Mad Weary is a direct stand-in for PTSD as they define it in the movie, a mind fracturing under the weight of an Eternal's trauma memories. And Angelina Jolie confirmed in an interview that Thena's Mad Weary is PTSD. Angelina also mentioned that her own PTSD helped inform her performance, which that I really respect and is great authentic casting.
So why did you hate the depiction?
At my last job, I was put in a position I should not have been, where it became necessary to disclose my PTSD. Do you know what HR's first reaction was?
I can think of a number of reactions it could have been.
None of them good, right?
Right.
He took a step back.
Oh.
And in most of my experiences where I've disclosed my PTSD, even to many longtime friends, the most common first reaction I get is some kind of flinch. A physical movement away from me, as if I may spontaneously become violent. And their reactions are completely subconscious. It's trained by society's depictions of what PTSD looks like.
Okay, so I don't think someone with PTSD would spontaneously become violent, per se, but doesn't PTSD make you have violent episodes?
For the vast majority, no. PTSD manifests more commonly with symptoms and behaviors like anxiety, avoidance, even timidity. People with PTSD are more likely to be victims than perpetrators. Only about 8% of civilians with PTSD ever have a violent episode, which is only a few points higher than the 2% of the general population who have violent episodes.
Oh wow, when you put it that way. But what about military PTSD?
And that's the second problem. Now, before I explain it, I want to ask a question. And the goal isn't to try and guess the right answer, but to answer what your general perception is. So, what percentage of people with PTSD do you think are civilians with no military background? Pause the video and put your perception in the comments.
I don't know. Of everyone diagnosed with PTSD, I'd say maybe 18% are civilian and 82% of people with PTSD are military.
That's usually around the number I get when I poll this question in seminars and other videos. Now, it's interesting to note that an estimated 80% of PTSD representations in film and TV depict PTSD from some sort of combat trauma. So this is the power of media to shape our perception.
So what's the actual number? How many people with PTSD have no military background?
94 to 96%.
What?
Yeah. Some additional stats. Women are twice as likely as men to develop PTSD, partially because the leading cause of PTSD is sexual violence. In fact, 71% of all female military personnel develop PTSD due to sexual assault.
71%?
Yeah. So the media's prevalence in depicting PTSD as a condition that mostly affects people who have seen combat and that makes people become violent
is really harmful and creates stigma and marginalization of
the 13 million people in the US alone living with PTSD. And that 13 million was the estimate before the pandemic.
Oof. So it's no wonder you don't like the depiction of Mad Weary in Eternals.
That's just the beginning.
Oh boy.
So Athena's PTSD is largely from combat and witnessing genocide, and it makes her become violent? Like, that's problematic enough. And also it incorrectly depicts how triggers manifest. Even in people who do get violent, they don't randomly attack everyone around them. But that's not even the most problematic representation in all of this.
You're kidding.
When Athena is diagnosed with Mad Weary, what do her friends, her family of Eternals, do?
They were gonna erase her mind.
Nothing like not even bothering to try treatment or therapy? I mean, they didn't even discuss ways they could even make accommodations.
I mean, they kinda did.
Exiling her to live alone with a handler for thousands of years without any contact with the outside world, even if her handler was her husband, is not accommodations. Accommodations provide a means for a person to live an equitable life as a part of society. Like, the ableist response to her PTSD literally is what fractured the Eternals. And I should point out that both the disabled characters were written as living in seclusion. Makkari lived locked away on their ship, and Athena lived in a wasteland, and everyone else lived normal lives among society.
Oh, that's a bad look.
Right?
The more you point out, the worse it gets.
And I can keep going. When they do meet up with Athena, her husband talks to her like a child. Hey, Athena, look who's here. And give me your hand. Though I do love that she was doing art therapy, and I wish they had done more with that.
I didn't clock the infantilization until you pointed it out.
Because we are so used to seeing disabled people treated that way.
Please tell me that's all.
One more.
Okay.
In the finale, minor spoilers here, her Mad Weary gets triggered. In this triggered state where she has never had self-control before, she's suddenly, without any therapy or treatment or any explanation as to why, has the self-control and cognitive ability to strategize, allowing herself to get caught in order to trick her opponent, and then through an act of sheer willpower overcomes her psychotic episode to kill the antagonistic creature. It's then implied that through this experience she has seemingly gained willpower over her Mad Weary.
Which I'm guessing is not how PTSD works.
No, or any mental health issue.
I mean, but this is a superhero movie that
has symbolism directly reflected to the real world with real world consequences. I can't tell you how many people treat my PTSD as a moral failing that proves that I lack willpower. And that if I just wanted to enough, if I just had the right motivation, I could overcome it with sheer force of will.
Just like Athena does in the end.
Exactly. But in reality, healing isn't cinematic. It isn't big and grandiose, and it usually doesn't happen in cinematic showdowns.
So, what do you rate this disability representation?
This is my own personal opinion, and the portrayal may resonate in positive ways with others who have different lived experiences. But for me, as someone with PTSD, on the harm scale, with 10 being the most harmful, I'll go easy on it because it's not as bad as if they had actually called it PTSD instead of using the metaphor of Mad Weary. And I'll give it an 8.
That high?
If you were walking down the street after watching this film and saw a stranger who somehow you had learned that they had Mad Weary,
I would run the f*** away. Is it helpful in any way?
On the helpful scale, with 10 being the most helpful, I give it a 1, and only that high because it depicted PTSD in women and it was authentically cast.
Psst, Disney.
Hire disabled writers.